Alabama rolls on to take on Kentucky. The last time we saw Alabama, they came away with a big-time win against LSU. Now, is this a trap game for the Crimson Tide, right? Because they're a 10.5-point favorite, but they got to go on the road to Lexington to take on a really scrappy Kentucky team. And a Kentucky team that I don't think is great. It's kind of in the middle of the pack. Devin Leary, outside of his standout performance against Tennessee, he's been one of the biggest disappointments out of the transfer portal. He was one of the highest ranked quarterbacks coming out of last year's transfer portal cycle, and he has not lived up to expectations. If Kentucky's going to have a chance at being able to win this game, they need Devin Leary to have the same performance that he had against Tennessee and then some, because they got a good enough group of wide receivers where they should be able to have success generating big plays against Alabama's secondary. Alabama's defense has been outstanding all season long, but this secondary does have a tendency to give up big plays. We saw it really early in that LSU game, in that early touchdown to Malik Neighbors that had Nick Saban going crazy on the sideline saying, oh man, like this shit again? Yeah, like Alabama's defense is really good, but they are a little bit inconsistent when it comes to their ability to limit the big plays in the passing game. So if Devin Leary can have this similar performance that he had against Tennessee, Kentucky has a solid chance to pull off this upset. But Kentucky isn't going to win this game playing their typical style of football where they want to give the ball 20, 30 times to Ray Davis and let him work. That's not going to happen. You're not going to have success running the football on this Alabama front. One thing that Alabama has a lot of is very good defensive linemen up front. And Kentucky's offensive line hasn't been as good as what it has been historically. Historically, Kentucky has always had one of the SEC's premier offensive lines, but not this season. You see, we saw what they did against Florida. They were able to gouge Florida's eyes out on the ground, but they weren't able to replicate that success against Tennessee. And I doubt they're able to replicate that success against Alabama. Alabama knows what Kentucky wants to do. They know their MO. They know that this is a team that is based on physicality. They want to run the football, and they want to impose their will up front against you. The only problem with that is, does Kentucky have the guys up front of their offensive line to really challenge Alabama's defensive line to run the football the way they want to? I don't think so. This game is going to come down to Devin Leary being able to attack this Alabama secondary. And if he is able to have a good game, there's a chance that this could become a trap game for Kentucky, and maybe it doesn't become a one-sided affair. On the other end of things, you got Jalen Milroe, who's coming off the best game that we've seen him play up to this point in his Alabama career, and it looks like Alabama's offense is starting to hit their stride. It's funny how before this season started, the big question mark for Alabama, the reason why Alabama wasn't going to be able to win it all this season was because the concerns we had at quarterback. And now when the final stretch of this year's college football season, and Jalen Milroe is starting to play like a Heisman candidate. He had 4 touchdowns on the ground against LSU. He was unstoppable. Not just was he great on the run, but he also had his best display as a passer. And one thing that's been really overlooked about Jalen Milroe that a lot of people haven't noticed up to the last couple of weeks is that he throws a really nice deep ball, and Alabama has receivers that are now starting to make a name for themselves. They have some legit trustworthy wide receivers that you can count on, and Alabama's also really good running the football themselves. Now, Kentucky's run defense is really good. They're 21st in college football in rushing yards per game allowed. The only problem with that is that they're not a one-dimensional team. Alabama can beat you throwing the football, although it may not be as consistently as you may like it to be, and they can beat you on the ground. I still believe that Alabama, regardless of how good Kentucky's defensive line is still going to be able to have success on the ground in the run game just with how dynamic of an athlete Jalen Milroe is. The defensive line of Kentucky is really good, and Alabama's offensive line is still a little bit shaky. Last week was probably their best performance of the season because they weren't going against a team that had that good of a defensive line. LSU has one of the worst defenses in all of college football. Kentucky's defense is pretty respectable. There's a chance that this game could be really close if Alabama ends up having to air it out themselves the way they kind of don't want to. Like, Jalen Milroe's a solid quarterback. He reminds me a lot of Blake Sims. Y'all remember Blake Sims? All the diehard Alabama fans probably remember who he is, but Jalen Milroe reminds me of a more athletic and juiced up version of him. And you see, he can win throwing the football, but he's not a guy who is going to do it pretty. Okay, he may have a couple of games where he looks on fire, but against this Kentucky defense, he has opportunity to throw a couple of interceptions, give the ball away a couple of times. The thing with Jalen Milroe is that he's a solid quarterback, but he doesn't always give you consistent play on a game-to-game basis. And you wonder how he's going to perform on the road in Lexington. I'm still taking the Tide to win this game. I think that they just overall the more complete team than Kentucky, and I think they win this game pretty convincingly. Give me Alabama 31-10 final score. Like, Kentucky, I don't trust Devin Leary. I don't trust their offensive line in this game, and although their defensive line is pretty formidable, we saw what Alabama was able to do the last time they went against a formidable defensive line in Tennessee. Tennessee also has a pretty solid defensive line. And in the second half, they were doing whatever they wanted to at times. Give me Alabama to win.